Hello and welcome for the tutorial video number 3 for the Citation 10 in Explain 12. Today we're going to do the descent, approach, landing in Augsburg, taxi in, and then shut down the aircraft. Our situation is where we left off after tutorial number 2. We're cruising at flight level 410. We're inbound to the Kempten VOR, and the first thing that you want to do when you are getting closer to your destination airport is to figure out when exactly you will have to leave your cruising altitude and start the descent. It's called descent planning. You can really make an art out of it, but I'm going to show you just some of the basics. Right now we are on a valid flight plan here with a VNAV working. You can see calculations are running, and this is actually your best or most convenient way to figure this out. You can see there on the progress page there's the destination EDMA, that's where we're going, and it's 167 miles to go. And of course this is convenient because you now know how far you have to fly, and this affects when you need to start your descent. The rule of thumb here is to just multiply the distance to go with the number 3. And so for example, at 100 miles to go, you should be at 300, level 300, 30,000 feet, and so on. And of course, you can go the other way too. If you're level 410, 420, 42 divided by 3 would be 13, so that's 130 miles. So at approximately 130 miles from the destination, we want to leave our cruising altitude. Often you will not have the luxury of having the VNAV run smoothly. You don't have the destination distance displayed conveniently, and then you just have to make do like they used to for dozens of years before the FMS came into aviation, and you just figure out the distance to go in some other way. You can look at your maps, and if you look at the approach map, you know that from the runway to the Maisach VOR it's about 20 miles, and then you have another 80 to go to Kempten plus another 50 to go to Maisach. So you just add these up and then you get the same number, or close to the same number, that you can just conveniently read off here on the progress page. And another option, of course, is to set the DME or a VOR DME that's located on your arrival airport. Read the distance off there. Of course, you have to figure out which way you're going to land. If you have to fly past the airport, then turn around and land the opposite direction, you obviously have to add 20 miles to that. But you know where I'm going with this. Figure out how far you have to fly, then you always know how high you should be at. And this is planning for a 3 degrees glide slope or 3 degrees approach path. And you can see the FMS is doing the same thing, 3.0 right here. Of course, the Citation could descend a lot more steeply. If you glide it in at the best glide speed, about 160, 170 knots, then it will glide at about 3 degrees. But mostly traffic in Europe and America flies a lot faster, and you would be really just a roadblock for everyone else. So you plan the approach with 280, maybe 300 knots, and to just stay in the flow of traffic. And at idle power and 300 knots, the Citation would dive down fairly steeply. And for passenger comfort and for staying within a sane approach profile, you don't do that unless you really have to minimize your time and fuel use towards your destination. So we're coming up at the top of descent, and an important part of flying fast airplanes is just spreading out the workload over the flight. Do a lot of stuff when there's not much to do, like during cruise flight. And for example, Airbus recommends to have all your approach planning done pretty much 15 minutes before you even start the descent from the cruising altitude, and that way you can concentrate on flying and don't have to set radios and brief the approach when things are getting really busy. And one way to memorize everything that you need to do is using some mnemonic or some words, like I use the Warn Big word. It starts with a W. That's checking weather at your destination, and when you do that, you usually check the ATIS or get weather somewhere else, and that's just a preliminary check. And you want to set your QNH or your altimeter setting during descent later on, so you have that preset and you don't have to spend a lot of time twisting that knob when you get closer to the airport. The A is for the approach to expect. Usually you have some experience with that. Today we know we'll fly the ILS 25 into Augsburg, and we'll set the minimum for that in a second. Here we come up on our top of descent, so let's start the descent. We'll continue with a warn big word in a second, but we don't want to miss that and then hurry to regain the approach profile. We'll get descent clearance from ATC, and they clear us to level 200. So I'm dialing this down. You can see this over here on the primary flight display. And we will just use the flight level change instead of VNAV because we want to stay in control of our speed. You can see it's at 8.3, so I'll just pull back on the thrust levers. Don't yank them back all the way. Maybe go to 60 first, and that 60% N1, that allows the plane to gradually pitch down, not dive down like a Stuka, and lift poor Austin out of his seat, and he's so busy improving X-plane. We really don't want to disturb him. So as we start the descent, one of the first things you want to do is look at your pressurization. And I'm going to switch over here to indicated airspeed before we do that, and actually pull back a little further on our thrust, go to 50% maybe. You want to be at a vertical speed that is 5 times the ground speed. So ground speed is about 500 knots now. We want to be at 2,500. That means that we descend on the 3 degrees profile, 5%, ground speed times 5, and then that comes out nicely. So here we go. We can look over at the pressurization. Just a quick word on these dials up here. You can see the actual cabin altitude out here. You can see the differential pressure on the little shorter arrow over here, shorter pointer. And this is the cabin climb or descent rate. And of course now it's all maintained automatically. You can see the little remote light on here. In the real plane, this works totally automatic. It knows the altitude of your destination airport. You don't need to fiddle with it, and you don't have to fiddle with it in X-plane as well. But you would, if you watch this closely during descent, you will see that it stays at about 7,500 feet cabin altitude until the plane is also at 7,500, and then it just dives down with the plane. And if you have a high descent rate, that would theoretically hurt people's ears, just like if you dive down in a swimming pool or without, clearing your nose. And that's why I like to, for ultimate realism, switch to the altitude selection mode. Now you can use this instrument down here, and the button or the knob with the A will actually set your cabin altitude. You see, if I put it up to 8,000, you see the cabin starts climbing, and eventually you will see this pointer rise up to 8. And on the outside is the planned flight altitude. So if you want to cruise at level 510, 51,000 feet, this would be the correct setting. And of course, if you fly lower, like at 41,000 feet, like we did, this would be the correct setting. And now that we're descending, we want to put this down to about 1,500 feet. That's the elevation of our destination. That way the cabin will sink. Now it will pressurize more and more, increase pressure inside. This will bring down the cabin altitude and eventually also the differential pressure as the plane descends to the same altitude will reach 0. Okay, now that this is taken care of, we can check back on our descent profile. And you want to do that periodically. We have about 100 miles to go. We should be at 30,000 feet. And you see we're still a little bit above that. Of course, Augsburg is at 1,500 feet elevation. So we're doing pretty good. We're very close to our descent profile, and we can just let it run like this. We'll continue with the preparation, the warrant big. We had the W, the weather. Of course, now we're in the descent, and we can actually switch. Let me get those yokes out of the way so you can see what I do a little better. You can switch from standard back to the altimeter setting. We know it's going to be about 1,030 as we get there. So set that up and then go back to standard while you're still flying in the flight level system. Do the same thing over here for the co-pilot. And the approach, we talked about ILS 2.5, and we will now set the minimums for that. You can switch between radar altimeter and barometric. Of course, it's a category 1 approach, so we use the barometric altitude. And I check my approach plate. In the minimum descent altitude for this approach, or the decision altitude, is 1760. So I'm setting that up already so we don't have to do it later on when we're busy getting closer to the airport. Just hold down the button here, do the same thing for the FO. Of course, you're flying this plane by yourself now. This is a lot more work than flying it with 2 people. There's a good reason why there's a minimum crew of 2, but that's just the way it is. So we have that set up. The next word is R for runway. We want to check the runway length. I know that it's sufficient. The runway isn't that long in Augsburg, but it's fine for a Citation 10. And we have a light wind from the south, which is also not a tailwind situation. The runway is dry, so that performance is not a problem. And the next is N for navigation radios, and we prepare those. I have NAV1 set to the Maisach VOR for now. Pre-select is the ILS frequency, and over here Maisach is active as well, and we have pre-selected the Augsburg DME 15.9. And one thing that's also part of setting up the radio NAV8s is setting the approach course for the ILS. And you cannot see it right now because the left side is still set to FMS. Remember, we did that before. And I have also set the right side to FMS over here. And it's important to do this first. Normally it's on NAV, but put it on FMS and give it a second or two. I found this is necessary because now as I switch the PFD selection to the right side, it stays in LNAV, and now the right side, the FO side, is governing the flight, so to say. It's following the same flight plan. It's not separate flight plans, so nothing should really happen when you do this. But now this frees the left side, and I can switch it back to NAV. And now I have the VOR1 and the course, and you can use the button down here to set the course. And of course the inbound course for the runway 25 is 249, so that is set up already. I could switch back to FMS if I wanted to, but I can just glance over at my FO side. I just leave it like this. And this also gives you a good presentation of the orientation of the runway as you get closer to the airport. Okay, the next one is the briefing. This is something that you still want to do even if you're by yourself. When you look at the approach plate, you want to brief the terrain situation, when you want to descend, leaving the initial approach fix after Maisach. We can go down to 3,500 and then we'll turn final. We'll leave that 3,500 feet at 5.4 from the Augsburg DME, and then follow a 3 degrees glide slope to the minimum of 1760. And then if we need to do a missed approach, we'll climb straight ahead to 2.7 DME, then turn right on track 009 until we intercept 069 degrees inbound to the Valda VOR, climbing to 3,500 feet initially. That's convenient, so we can just leave that after we leave that in the altitude pre-selection when we do the descent. And then when we get within 6.0 DME from Valda, we can climb to 4,000 feet and then just try the approach again or divert to our alternate. Time to check back on the distance. At 70 miles, we want to be at 210. And you can see we're already a little lower than that. So I'm going to increase thrust here a little bit. We don't want to get too low. Part of being on the correct profile is saving fuel. One of the worst things that you can do is just dive down and then fly the last 50 miles at 5,000 feet. It creates a lot of noise and takes a lot of time. And of course, you also waste a lot of fuel that way. So let's increase that. We're coming up on level 200. We ask ATC for further descent and they're happy to oblige. We get cleared to level 100. And now 100 is one of those magic points where you want to decrease speed. I actually want to increase speed now. I said we want to descend with 280 first, so I'm dialing that up and I'm adding some thrust so we don't get too low on our profile. And now we approach level 180, 18,000 feet. That's one of the magic altitudes in the States. That's where the uncontrolled airspace starts, and you really want to see and be seen. So I use that for my second package in our approach preparation, and that means turning on the landing lights, even in Europe where the uncontrolled airspace doesn't start until you're passing 10,000 feet. But it doesn't hurt to turn those on a little earlier. Another thing is you want to turn on the seatbelt signs again, put them to passenger safety, so the cabin knows that we're within 15 minutes or so of landing and can get ready for that. And there's some more things that you want to do when you pass 18,000 feet. I use it to also turn off the engine sync again. You want to have that off for the approach, and I will also turn on the APU. Now you can elect to turn the APU on after you land, or maybe you don't need it at all. You know there's someone waiting with the ground power and it's nice weather, but Citation recommends to turn that on or have it running when you're at lower altitudes. It might help with restarting an engine. So we'll do that. We check that the bleed air is still off, the generator is already on, that's fine, and we'll start the APU. Wait until it gets going, and then we can just release the start switch and it will spin up, eventually take over. And once it's running, we can also turn on the bleed air. This would help restarting an engine if it flames up. Okay, now this is the 18,000 feet package. Now the thing that remains on our Warn Big Word is we did the items. These are the approach items for I, and we'll do the checklist later on, and we'll do that after we have actually descended towards an altitude. So left, you know, we're still in the flight level system, and once ADC clears us down to an altitude, we'll switch the altimeters and then we'll do the checklist. Of course, I said before that the checklists here in the aircraft are normally electronically. You would call them up with this panel down here. The normal checklists are over here, and this does not work in the X-Plane 12 model. Maybe at one day it will. So for now we don't have checklists, but of course it's imperative to always read your checklists, and you know, you can write your own little checklist or whatever, maybe get some from the internet. I haven't been able to find an authentic one, so I'm just doing it without the checklist now. Time to check distance again. 50 miles, should be at 15,000 feet. I'm just a little below that. And you could also set some gates for yourself. Let's say at Maisach, you know you have 20 miles to fly, which equals 6,000 feet plus 1,500 elevation in Augsburg. So that should put you at 7,500 feet. Maybe subtract a little bit for that because you still need to slow down. So around 7,000 feet over Maisach would be a good gate for you to target, and that way you can also double check your approach profile. I know that many people love descending on VNAV, and kind of like takes these worries off your head, but you'll find out that VNAV sometimes does not work, and I've rarely found a real pilot who relies on VNAV 100%. It's a nice tool, it's a nice aid, but you know, when you program garbage into the FMS, then it will spit garbage back out at you, and it's easy to fall into that trap and just rely on what it says and then find yourself in a bad situation. We're approaching the top of clouds here, and we'll have to think about the anti-ice. Of course, the pitot-static is always running. We also have the window heat shield always on, and that's according to procedure, but now we have these switches down here on the bottom. You would turn them on as the situation dictates, and the engines are especially susceptible to icing because they suck in the air, and that drops the temperature, so you always want to run them and when there's visible moisture and the ram air temperature is below 10 degrees. You can see the ram air temperature over here. It's at 4 degrees, so that's definitely below, so we'll turn that on. And especially in the descent, you always want to run the engine anti-ice unless it's colder than minus 40 static air temperature, and that's a different thing. You can see the static air temperature is over here, it's -9, but the air gets heated up as the airplane hits it. It gets compressed and heated up. So the ram air temperature is +5, the static air temperature is -8, and there's a considerable difference here, especially when you're flying fast. So keep both of these. When the RAT is below 10 and the SAT is warmer than -40 and you have visible moisture out there, run the engine anti-ice. And the stabilizer and slat anti-ice you would not run until you actually get icing. Now this is hard to see and explain, and it's not visually depicted on the wings or anything, so you just have to guess or just play it safe. We're descending past, or we're reaching level 100 now, so we need to slow down the plane below 250. Here we go, and then we can do a further descent. I'm not sure why it didn't go to altitude select here, but we'll just descend further. And I set 7,000 at level 70 at Maisach, decrease the range a little bit, and go to altitude, go flight level change. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's not going back to the altitude select mode right now. We'll have to watch that. But go to 70. We're still in level change. And we'll keep going down. Approaching Maisach, 5 miles to go, 9,500. Come back a little bit further on the N1. Select a better range on the FO side. And this highlights a problem with automation. It works 99.9% of the time, but you always need to make sure that you watch it, because at 0.01% of the time that it doesn't work as expected, it's going to get you into trouble, and then you can just say, oh well, the autopilot didn't, it should work probably, but sometimes it doesn't, and you are the pilot. You need to check things and work them out. We're coming up over at Maisach, a little higher than planned, coming further back on the N1, and the plane is going to turn now towards the outbound radial 331, and this is a good time to slow down a little further when you get closer to the airport, within the vicinity, the terminal area. You want to fly about 180 knots and be at flaps 15. Now, extending the flaps is something that you can do once you're below the SF5, the 250 knots mark here. So we're going to extend the flaps, or the slats first. You can see them go orange and then white. And the next step is extending the flaps to 5. Go to power idle, so we don't get too high. 20 miles to go, should be at 7.5. We're good. And then as we approach 180 knots, we'll extend the flaps to 15. Now, once we're at flaps 15, you can memorize the N1 of 60% for level flight. And 60% is going to stay with us for the whole approach, plus minus 3-4%, of course, depending on your gross weight. But that's a good N1 to memorize when we later on fly manually. And of course, since the Citation does not have an auto throttle, you always want to watch your airspeed. On flight level change, it's not such a big deal. Here we come up on 7,000, and see, since the plane is not maintaining altitude, I'm going to hit altitude here, go to 60%, and you see that, well, we need a little more, maybe 65 as it's climbing back up, but that's going to stabilize speed nicely. But of course, we want to go down to 3,500, and I'm going back to flight level change, pull out the power, and you can see that we're getting close to our inbound turn over here. That's where we turn onto the final leg, so to say, and 3,500 is an altitude, so we're going to switch to the QNH or altimeter setting, as they say in America, and now we would read the approach checklist, make sure that everything is done. We'll glance over here, check on our cabin, and it's already at 1,500 feet, and the differential pressure is going to decrease towards zero as we get there, so that we're unpressurized as we land this aircraft. Now the weather's nice, we're below the clouds, we can turn off the engine and the ice again over here. And you know, a lot of people love flying with the autopilot until it almost, you know, gets them to the runway or even does auto land. This plane cannot do that as far as I know, but I actually think it's always important to keep your manual flying skills current, and that's why I like to fly manually even when I fly the 747. You're always tired when you arrive somewhere, but if you never fly because you're always tired, then you can't do it when you need to. So we're at 1,000 feet to go. I have set up a nice view like this that allows me to fly with more precision. So I'm going to click the autopilot disconnect button and add some thrust to decrease my descent rate. 300 feet to go, and I look at the display for the turn in. Of course, one thing I forgot is switch these nav radios. So now you can see my ILS is coming up. It's showing IAGW as an identification. And I'm going to turn in now, looking at my nav display. Always remember to trim a lot when you fly manually. You always want to be able to let go of the stick for a second without the plane freaking out. And the key to flying accurately in a high performance plane like this is the pitch and power principle. You always need to know, or at least fly a certain pitch that you see right now. See my little black square right here in the E80i in the middle. That's just, you know, resting on top of the 2.5 degree pitch marker, and this is where I look every second. I always look at the pitch, then I look at my vertical speed, then I look at the pitch, vertical speed, look at the localizer, look at the pitch, and back and forth, look at my airspeed, look at the pitch. And this is how you can fly accurately, how you can, you know, not chase any needles. Always fly a certain pitch and see what kind of performance you get from that. And if you see, okay, I'm climbing, then you say, okay, I need to decrease my pitch, but just, you know, gentle, just, you know, a fraction of a degree will do it, and always make gentle corrections. As the plane approaches the glide slope, you can see that green triangle moving down. When it's 1 dot to go, you want to extend the landing gear, followed by the flaps. Here we go, gear down. And then we'll drop the flaps all the way. And now the neat thing is that starting the descent now, you can basically stay at 60%. This is the power that you'll need on final approach. And the approach speed is 130 knots for a heavy aircraft at 30,000 pounds. But the nice thing is that you can actually look at the indexer up here, and as long as you see those two orange stripes, you're a little too fast, so you bring back the power a little bit, check the speed, and when the green donut shows up, then you're on speed. This is the correct angle of attack. So I'm bringing back in a little bit of power. Notice my pitch, it's just resting on top of the 2.5 thing right there. Trim a little bit, and see, this is what you want to see. The green donut, not the red chevrons above it, maybe the orange ones. And if there's a lot of wind, you would actually, 1,000 is checked, actually increase speed a little bit above that. And you can see 130 knots since we're about 30,000 pounds. Now the plane does not have automatic spoilers, so you need to extend them on landing. And as you yank back the power when you're at about 30 feet, there's a tiny pitch up moment. Because the engines are mounted on top of the fuselage and they stop pushing down when you decrease thrust. So you want to be prepared for that. You don't want to float in very long when you're approaching a short runway like this. Then you want to open the reverses. I'm switching back to a bigger view now so I can see the runway. As you get closer to the runway, you always want to check back how the lineup is looking visually and slowly starting looking out of the window more. There's a wind from the left side, 30 knots. So we don't want to decrab for a long time and risk getting blown off the runway. This is going to be a fairly firm landing. Minimums, continue.
100. Light slow. 50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
And bring out the spoilers. Nose gear down, then the reverse. If you pull the reverse all the way, you might get a takeoff warning because the plane thinks that you want to take off again since you add so much power. This is probably a bug in X-plane. I don't think the real plane would do it, but I just go to about 50%, which is fine. Close the reverses, and once the speed is under control, don't try to make an exit that you can't make. Then turn off the runway. As you turn off the runway, you want to bring up your ground spoilers, retract the flaps. Some people still get nervous when airplanes taxi in with those devices extended. It used to be like a secret sign that there's a hijacking or other problem going on, and that's why you want to make sure that you get them up. Also, you don't want to damage them by blowing up any parts into the wings or the flaps. Of course, there's no danger in a Citation with the engines mounted on top of the fuselage, but on other aircraft, that's important. Now, as you get off the runway, you also want to turn off your landing lights, turn on the taxi lights to avoid blinding people. You want to turn off your strobe lights. Just keep the rotating beacon on, and you want to turn off your transponder. Here we go to standby. And of course, it depends on the airport. A lot of airports want you to keep it running, just turning off the TCAS, but keep the transponder running on the ground because they have some sort of ground movement radar, and they want to see where you taxi around. Okay, we're getting closer to our parking position, and one thing I forgot before is turning actually on the bleed air. I'll do that now. And now the one thing when you fly X-plane, you rarely know which parking spot's going to be open. I picked this one here where that King Air sits now to park before, but since X-plane dynamically assigns parking position, it's now taken. We'll just play along with that. And the Citation is a fairly big airplane. It's not going to fit in with these other airplanes parked over here. So we'll just, stop in front of this hangar here and then say it's not our problem, get a tug and move it somewhere where it doesn't bother people. Okay, always make sure that you are not getting too close with your wings. It's not a 747, but it's still fairly large. And as you get closer to whoever is waving you in, you always want to make sure that your taxi light is out because they are kind of bright. As you stop, make sure that the parking brake is set, and you can see there's enough hydraulic pressure, and as you release the brakes you see the plane isn't moving. That is a good sign. And now we're ready to turn off the engines. Grab them on the very outside. Oops, that didn't work. Pull them back, let go. Same with the left one. Pull. Oops, it's a little finicky sometimes. Pull back, let go, and now the engines shut down. You can see the oil pressure warnings come up there, and I'll wait for the second one. There it is. Now cancel the warning lights. And now the engine's turning off is always a sign for the passengers to jump up, regardless of what you do with the seatbelts. But I'm turning it off just to go along. Also turn off the rotating beacon, and that means it's safe to approach the airplane. We'll turn off the windshield heat, pitot-static. I should have turned that off right away. Don't let it run more than 2 minutes after you finish or after touchdown, because it might get too hot. I kind of forgot that, but I don't think we spent more than 2 minutes getting to the parking position. So put that on your list there and don't do like I do. And once you're done with that, you can actually turn off the avionics. Cancel this. And now it's time to let people get off the airplane. And here is the door. And Austin, we are there. Now the last thing before we actually go get our Weissbier is turning off the APU. So we'll turn the bleed off and also turn off the generator, shut the APU down. And once it's shut down, we can turn the master switch off, turn off the batteries. And now the plane should be dormant, but of course we forgot the standby power. That one's off as well. And you can see a little red light over here that warns you to also turn off the emergency lights, because right now there's no power in the airplane. Austin is still busy, and you can see no power. That means the emergency exit lights turn on just like they're supposed to, but they would drain overnight. So turn them off, and that way no one is going to complain that they are empty when they start up the plane in the morning. I hope you enjoyed this video and have fun flying the Citation 10 in X-Plane 12.